Guys, things are changing very quickly, quicker than we anticipated. We got the new data, the new numbers. If you remember Sunday, we did a report talking about the cavitation problems at Lake Powell. Now, that has changed their numbers drastically. We're going to get into it. But it may force the Secretary of the Interior, guys, or someone in that group to step in just a little bit earlier, because if they don't, within the next 7 to 10 days, there's going to be major problems at both Lake Mead and Lake Powell. Stay tuned. We're about to get into it. And guys, if we don't see an emergency federal declaration forcing immediate historic cuts to lower basin agriculture, by mid-July, the Bureau of Reclamation will have officially lost control of the descent. And that's when you're going to see the Secretary of Interior. And really, I'm not hoping for a faster timeline as far as the elevation drops at the lakes, but a faster timeline on something changes within the guidelines. They've got guidelines that still extend into 2027 on some of their charts. But again, we're going to have to see one of two things. And that is either they're going to drain Mead because Powell now has a much different threshold as far as the shutoff. But they'll either have to keep the agriculture below Lake Mead supplied, which will drain Mead, or they will have to cut it off because Powell is about to be affected much sooner than we thought. Let's get into those numbers. And right now, the feds really are running out of options if you think about it. They're running out of time too, but they're facing a brutal zero-sum choice before August arrives. Save the Southwest power grid or feed the desert crops. You cannot do both. The Secretary of the Interior holds the unilateral legal power to step in today, seize the agricultural headgates, and stop Lake Mead from crashing past the 1035-foot turbine line. But remember, problems will start as far as head pressure at 1040, 3 feet from that and 8 feet from this number, which again is that 1035 number. But the critical part about Powell, and we'll take a look at that now just to refresh you on their critical levels. But right now, the leadership in Washington, I'm not sure what they're waiting for, but more than likely, they are getting prepared to do exactly this. I would hope so, to step in, bypass the Bureau of Reclamation and their dates, because they were done a while back and things are changing too quick for those numbers to be accurate. We talked about how Mother Nature, guys, has no quarter when it decides to shift. But the leadership, if they don't step in, then what's going to happen, guys, in 23 days, the Western grid is going to hit a physical brick wall. And we're talking about power, but also the water downstream to the agriculture. Will the crops be saved, or will Mead be temporarily saved? That's one of the things that they're facing. And under federal law, the Secretary of the Interior has the absolute, or is the absolute water master of the lower Colorado River Basin. He does not need permission from the state governors to act in an emergency. Under the Boulder Canyon Project Act, the Secretary has the unilateral legal authority to seize control of the head gates, declare a federal emergency, and force immediate delivery cuts to agriculture to save the dam infrastructure. Now, or vice versa. Dry up the crops and postpone what looks like is going to happen anyway sooner or later at Mead. But again, if the Secretary refuses to use that authority within the next 14 days, then it looks like they would be allowing Hoover Dam to slide into a mechanical failure. Now, under a linear curve, remember that's a straight line curve, and that does not account for increasing temperatures and a couple of other things, evap rate. But now the numbers at Powell have changed. I know I said that twice. We're going to get there. But under the standard model, we're at 23 days away from Lake Mead hitting 1035, where Hoover Dam's old turbines fail. That's starting at a zero-sum choice, guys, for the feds, because it's between saving the Southwest power grid are feeding the desert crop. And now that timeline has accelerated forward, and they're really caught again in a squeeze. Because the Secretary has the power, federal power, to step in today, cut the agricultural draft, and stabilize Mead before the turbines start drawing air. If the leadership of the Department of Interior is waiting until winter, again, guys, we hope they're not, and I don't think they are. And remember, the cutoff date is October 1st for the other sections of the river to either come up with some kind of fair plan to split the water, which is not going to be there much longer if they're not careful, or they're going to step in anyway on October 1st. That's what they're talking about, winter. But if they wait till then, and we don't have that long, guys. This is July. We're already in trouble. So you'd get through July, August, September, and to the 1st of October. All of what we're talking about is going to be almost, I hate to say it, but down the drain at that point. And so they're going to watch. I would say watch the headlines for some type of move, some type of changes. They've got to make a decision. Remember talking about Powell. Because of the cavitation problem, and let's go there and we'll look at the numbers real quick, but because of that cavitation problem, that 1049 number has changed drastically. It was about 35 feet before they got there. Now it's about 14. Now, all this data is a day old unless you go to the hourly model at Mead, but what we're looking at Powell as of Tuesday, July 7th, 2026, 3,524.99. That's the mean sea level. Now, all the reports since we began said they're going to start getting into turbine problems, things like that, at 3490. That would have been giving them 34.99 feet. We've been looking at 35 feet. A 0.16 elevation change over that day, but still here's a major problem coming out of upstream, places like Flaming Gorge, who are in just as much trouble as anybody else. And they, they're not very happy about, losing the water that they've reserved. But it's one long chain controlled by, the government to try to balance it all back in the days when things were plenty, I guess. But their outflow at 789 right there. So again, our number for turbine pressure problems, just like 1035 is at Mead, went from 3490 to now 3510, because they cannot put that much pressure on the cavitation at Powell. In other words, they can't. What's going to happen is this outflow here to your right to Mead is going to start to collapse, because they cannot get past 3510 without having to shut down. In other words, the cavitation will take over. It will destroy Powell. So at that point, in 14 feet, 14.99 feet, this outflow will have to be cut very sharply. What does that do? It really speeds up the timeline of Mead going into 1040 and 1035. You see what I'm saying? And guys, let's move upstream from Powell just so you can see what we're dealing with. Powell's going to be limited because of cavitation. They're going to have to shut down Mead as it's already dropping very quickly. They're going to have to shut down Mead very quickly or just sacrifice the turbines. But let's again go to Flaming Gorge north of Powell, guys, upstream. And I want to give a shout out to Tony Valdez and his wife, guys. They are watch our videos, and they are commenters in our comments, so watch for that. And so, but they are the owners and operators of Buckboard Marina there, and they're facing problems. I think they're only a couple feet away from losing their municipal water supply from having to move so far out into the inlets and bays there, just like we're seeing both at Colville and at Temple Bar. But this, again, their elevation 614.60, and if I'm not mistaken, guys, somewhere around maybe 610 or somewhere in that area, you're getting into some of those problems. Tony, if you're watching, you guys let us know in the comments. But it was 11-foot change yesterday. Here's the problem. What they've done, and it's basically their drain project, is to sacrifice Flaming Gorge, a beautiful place, to save Powell, and their attempt to balance it and Mead out in whatever way they're going to end up having to do it. But look at the inflow at Flaming Gorge. Check that out. You know, we had no snow. The early snow melted in March, according to most reports, and the high pressure setting up now, or really since March, has kept any moisture away and melted all the snow prematurely. We've got a 600 a high pressure zone setting up at 600 decameters, guys, or DEM as they call it. That's going to be a record breaker over this entire river valley. The Rockies are showing intense heat at the very crest. Instead of alpine coolers, like I said before, they become thermal radiators. And they're pushing that high pressure up out of the 500 range into the 600, or a very low 600 range, but they're all records. That puts pressure down on not only the land, but the pressure down on the water. Pushes it down further. It can cause increased cavitation, and that could very well be part of the problem that we saw Sunday at Lake Powell. But again, since they're in the drain mode for both, I think, Fontenelle also and Flaming Gorge, they're going to let it get to the absolute minimum, which is not going to take that long, possibly 2 or 3 months. But at their outflow rate, again, about 8 times their inflow rate, that is a critical drain. And again, they're sitting there thinking, we saved all this water. Now it's being drained because downstream has basically overbuilt everything. And so what was beautiful, there's pictures there. I saw ice fishermen, boats landing, beautiful land. I just hate that I have never been to any of those lakes. Been to the Grand Canyon, but that's it. But we're losing a lot there. Nature's going to reclaim itself. And again, I think Flaming Gorge is in a unique situation because they have a couple of other things, fishing expeditions and all that more than likely could continue even with just a river there. Not sure that's their business. But again, you're dealing with 8 times outflow to Powell. That's the point. Now, going back to Powell, again, yesterday, inflow 3273, outflow 789. But this 3273, guys, reflects what they released probably close to 5 or 6 days ago. It takes that long for that outflow decrease to show up here at Powell. Now, at Powell, again, we've got over 3,000 feet incoming. Coming out of Flaming Gorge, they have 1934 CFS coming out, right? So as that timeline goes by, as far as the time from the release coming down the Colorado River to get to Lake Powell, we're going to start seeing drops there. Now, there may be a couple of rivers involved between Flaming Gorge and Powell that's keeping that upflow up. We'll just have to see. But every river now is suffering from the zero snow melt. And so will we see this start to affect and almost double the time Mead is going to be forced to shut down? Let's look at that. And as I mentioned, people, I guess you could call it dragging their feet too long or not looking at the information fast enough, but they've created a runaway train. Powell is dropping over a foot a week while discharging 7,892 cubic feet per second. Yet even with that massive volume of upper basin water rushing into Mead, Mead is still sitting at 1043. It's not rising. One thing, you've got 260 miles of one of the hottest canyons in the world, probably, including the Grand Canyon, of evaporation before it gets down there. But we're still seeing, again, over 3,000 inputs. That 3,000 feet per second, cubic feet per second in input, that cannot hold up much longer under current conditions. And that could accelerate it again with all the water, 7,892 coming out of Powell here, and it's not raising Mead at all. That's telling you massive loss of evaporation in the river and on the big lake surface at Mead. And why is that, guys? Think about it. It's getting into the hottest part of the year. ACs are going to be maxed out, right? Both industrial and residential. The stores you go into, your home, the big industries. But the lower basin's agricultural and municipal consumption is completely outstripping the emergency supply line, talking about the 7,800 foot coming down out of Powell, sacrificing Flaming Gorge to try to prop up Mead, not necessarily for Mead's sake, but for downstream's sake. In other words, we're seeing a domino collapse, and the timeline has changed. And guys, we're talked about waiting too long, right? But the system isn't just stressed, and right now it is in control. It's not really the officials anymore. We're at that point, and we talked about that time coming. But the system is actively failing to self-regulate, and the emergency releases are no longer enough to keep Mead above its historical critical lows. Guys, in that Sunday report, just this past Sunday from the Colorado Sun, remember this, they had changed the critical point of turbine problems at Lake Powell from 3490, giving them about 35 or so feet, to 3510 now, guys. Look at this. That's what I was talking about. Federal operators must keep now, because of cavitation, the reservoir from dropping down to 3510 by winter. That's only 14 feet away, and you're doing a little over a foot per week right now, about 1.2 or something. By the way, Mead now is up to 1.4 foot drop per week, almost 3 feet every 2 weeks, and that's it will reach that very quickly. But again, Glen Canyon Dam, we watched the number just like we watched 1035 at Mead forever. The 3490, they just shaved off 20 feet right there. And so what does that mean, guys? That means 20 feet sooner than they expected to have to prop or be able to prop Mead up. They have 20 feet less feet to do it with. That means much less time. Now it becomes critical at the turbines at 3510. They're at 3524. 14 weeks at the max with no other things changing. The heat's changing, the high pressure's changing, the upstream feed. You saw the very low inputs coming into Flaming Gorge at the moment. How long can it keep up that output? But even that, just as we're seeing Lake Powell put out nearly 8,000 cubic feet a second to Mead, it is not maintaining its level. If it weren't doing that, guys, we would be at 1030 now and in big trouble. So will they be able to switch the grids in time to keep them from going down? Because Lake Mead is in a downhill plunge at 1035 with lower pressure and only 4 turbines. They're going to be in a 24/7 hour bind, only getting out 20% of the power that they were designed to do at this level. It's going to put strains on the grid. So you guys pay attention to it. They will have to quickly change from whatever area that the big switches, big computers run, to switch from grid A to grid B, from the cheapest hydropower again to coal, natural gas, or nuclear. That is going to come very quickly, and we talked about the increased rates. So be prepared for that. So Powell's kind of in a balancing act too. If they go too low, they get back into the lower drains that were damaged in the 1982 release. Again, opposite things happen. Lake Powell was overfilling. They had to release it, and remember the cavitation tore away the concrete and rebar discharge tunnels, eat into the actual mountain itself, into the rocks, and washed a lot of that out. Now, they came in with some kind of epoxy, guys. I don't think it's held up real good in other cases, but anyway, they don't want to get down below the turbines, and they don't want to get above the level to where the cavitation starts really being a problem. So they're in a balancing act, almost like almost a dead pool situation. They don't want to get too high. They don't want to get too low. Where is that going to put Mead? It's going to put it in the situation we just talked about. they're going to have to make serious adjustments at Powell much sooner. And each thing that they cut off will increase the rate of drop at Lake Mead and Hoover Dam hydropower. Now let's just look at it a moment. At Flaming Gorge, the upper pools, you got what they're calling the emergency DROA releases. They should just call it drain, DRIAN. But anyway, that's basically what they're doing. Flaming Gorge, emergency federal orders to sacrifice the upper basins to keep the lower ones in place. Really, it's the only way to work with gravity. It couldn't work the other way, but again, you have to feel for the people that did reserve their water. Anyway, Lake Powell, when it crossed the 52-55 foot, that's when we started seeing cavitation problems, guys. 35-25. And that's what they're calling the cavitation cushion. But now Lake Powell's at 35-24-99. It crossed it Sunday. But option A, they can keep the outflow high, destroy the dam's tubes, that's the outflows, via cavitation. Or option B, they can decrease the outflow, triggering hydro water collapses at Mead. So it's like, who do you shoot first? You know, think about it. Now, looking at the numbers, this could force Powell down from its output to Mead, guys, by this amount. Listen, Mead is losing over a foot a week while receiving a massive 7,892 cubic feet from Powell. You just saw that. If operators throttle Powell's outflow down to match its measly, what they're calling 3273 cubic feet a second, the inflow to stabilize the reservoir and prevent cavitation, the math changes instantly. This is where we get into the upgraded numbers. Okay, here we go. Mead input, the flow from Powell is cut in half. Lake Mead's single largest supply line will drop by over 55%. You know that will immediately decrease the number of days till we get to the 1035 numbers and 1040, which we're only 3 feet away. But that will increase the time of those drops and any further drops getting into problems with the third straw. In other words, we're looking at possibly less than 10 days from having serious problem at Lake Mead under these current conditions. Now, looking at the new data, guys, you're going to see trends start to change pretty quick. In this first scenario, we'll use the 14-day measurement trend like we always do. It's showing now, as of yesterday, that Mead is losing 0.207 feet over 2 weeks, putting it just over 1 foot per week. That's the main linear model. But we are seeing a daily increase rise to almost 1.4. Remember that, feet per day, not per week. So we'll just stay at the 1 plus a fraction linear timeline. So to reach 1040, that's where the cavitation problem is really stepping in, and that's 3.3 feet away. It'll take 25 days, July 30th. To reach 1035 on the linear line, 8.3 foot drop, it will take 56 days, September 2nd. Nothing's linear. If you remember the graph from a video or so ago, we were looking at the linear rate at 1040 at Mead, getting down to where you had cavitation problems at 22 days. And then if we looked at the declining line, it was only 15 days. You guys remember that? And that would have put 1035 into early September, right? Now, if we put in the post-cut nonlinear pace, what that is adding in the cut rates of Powell and adjusting slightly because that 600 DM high pressure zone may go slightly above it. Not much, and we didn't put much in. But here's what it does. Because of the nonlinear pace and the post-cut, after Powell has to shut down to prevent cavitation, could happen at any time. I'm waiting on information any day that the feds are getting ready to make a move. They need to, big time, just to slow it down. I don't think there's much way you can really stop a draining river with no rain, but to mitigate it better, help the people out a little bit, whatever's got to be done, prepare for power outages, food and water, things like that. But that needs to happen now. Now think about this. After Powell, which it looks obvious, is going to have to cut their output to Mead, we could be looking at a pace of 2.45 week drop in Mead instead of 104. You see that? Over twice as much drop. So you got 5 feet basically every 2 weeks, right? That would put the 1040 target coming up in 3 feet in 9 days. Now think about that. We're only 5 feet from Mead hitting 1035, shutting down the turbines. You have 4 low heads, but they're going to be extremely limited and extremely strained. But so if we're doing 5 feet every 2 weeks, and we only have 5 feet to go from 1040 to 1035, you can say, guys, we've got 2 weeks and 9 days until we see 1035. And just kind of throwing in this update on some of that data input was the weather data is completely locked in, guys. Charts are verifying that a massive heat dome is actively shifting westward from the Midwest and anchoring itself directly over the Rocky Mountains, right where we're seeing the extreme heat glows over the tips of the thermal radiators now. The meteorologists confirmed that this ridge pattern is pushing upper air heights at a slightly above the critical decameter threshold. Now, you're seeing 600, and that's very high, but when it's over high elevations like over the Rockies, it's rare, and it represents a worst-case scenario for the hydrology of the Colorado River Basin. It becomes a moisture sucking everything up, guys, and the high pressure puts pressure on the lakes. It increases the heat. Again, by July 13th, in just, 4 or 5 days, guys, things are going to be different than they are today. Now, the West is already seeing some of it, but as it moves across into this humidity, you're going to see a change, so be prepared for that. Guys, and yesterday we were talking about the marinas and how the outlets were getting down to about 3 feet, and you had large boats that draw from 3.5 to 4.5 feet. And so I didn't see this yesterday, but here's what happened. The National Park Service and park rangers issued highly publicized warnings stating that lake levels dropping to 1044 feet were exposing massive new boating hazards. The silt and obstacle advisory, again, while these public releases focus on visitor safety, telling boaters to watch out for shallow sandbars, insurance lawyers will use yesterday's press blitz to prove the marina operators were operating in a fully realized active emergency zone. And so again, the Park Service made the move. We talked about you got millions of dollars of boats that cannot get out, cannot be towed out, cannot go out over the narrow passes. And so what has happened is the insurance companies just got a bail-in or a bailout, how you want to call it. Now they don't have to insure anything. And if you look back at the newest records from the Bureau, even included in that report that was not supposed to come out to 2027, that it showed July getting into 1040. You can look at that up on the public records. That gives them the legal standing as far as the insurance companies to say, nope, you were warned by the Bureau that these issues were going to come up, and that in July you're going to reach 1040, and you can't get out anything under about 1045, guys. And if you're drawing at 3.5 or 4.5 foot of water, you can't even plane out. Of course, they're going to be going slow, but think about it, that much weight. So because they issued that, they issued the obstacle advisories, it has really put the marina operators and owners in a bind. Right now, if someone says, okay, say for instance, water gets down, you can't get these big giant houseboats up. Some are 60 footers, guys, weighing tons. You can't get it out, sets on the mud, it's going to warp the frame. It instantly is in trouble. Who is responsible? Was it the marina operators that are, and they're responsible to take all the messages from the National Park Service, I think, and the Bureau of Reclamation, and look at that and advise the people, or at least make their decisions. So I think the delay has had a couple of different effects, waiting for October, whatever, because now they're all caught off guard, and now the insurance companies are out from under it. Again, the insurance lawyers will use yesterday's press blitz to prove the marina operators were operating in a fully realized active emergency zone. You still allowing boating. But guys, if you look at the webcam at Temple Bar, maybe they've came into our comment too, the owners there. And there's not a lot of traffic going out of that webcam. And the cam that looks out over the tire barrier is, I think, where the outlet is, and it's just not much traffic, maybe some smaller boats. So they may have already shut down traffic to protect from, getting grounded and knocking out the bottoms of your boats and any equipment you have there, depth finders, intakes, whatever, to prevent that. But now you got a grounding problem. We may end up seeing evacuated marinas turned into campgrounds or rodeos or whatever they do. You know what I mean? But it looks like there's going to be a lot of infrastructure left behind because the logistics to move it is beyond the point. I mean, you'd have to wait a couple of years for the mud to dry out long enough to get the big heavy cranes in to pick up these boats and put them on some type of trailer. And the concrete doesn't go that far. And if they did it, as soon as the water went out, the boats would sink. The trailers would sink in the mud. We talked about that. So when we talk about, the reason I'm saying this is when we talk about Mother Nature has no quarter, she will come at every angle. And just a natural law of it, it looks like she's also attacked the financial sector, because there's going to be banks, insurance companies involved in this, and in handing the keys over back to the mortgage lender, because you have no lights or water and you can't sell the house. So we're going to see an economic problem hitting very quickly. At the same time, we're seeing the water drop. But guys, I wanted to come in here and give you this update. If I see some other information, we may get a short update a little later in the evening, and it will be short. But this information should help the people, especially in that area. But it'll make everyone realize, as we focus on a micro problem, as far as the planet goes, it is a macro, planet-wide event. So you can't really say, I hope they in the desert are preparing, when here in Mississippi and many other states, water is running out of the wells. I mean, there's no water to be had hardly. They're going to have to drill deeper wells below the depleted aquifers now to get to that. The earth is heating. It's time for change. It's time to turn your attention into the absolute necessities, because you're not going to have much choice. So prepare. We're watching it, guys. You watch it. Our Father loves you. We love you. It's a heads up. Be safe. Again, don't forget to subscribe to our new Sumerian history channel. I'll put the link below. A lot of you guys did, and I appreciate it very much.